My pleasure to introduce this presentation, Live Sports Viewers, Personalized Experiences, Advertising Trends, and Devices, presented by Adobe. At the end, we'll leave a few minutes for questions, so please wait for the microphone to come to you before asking. And with that, I will turn it over to Michael Goldstein from Adobe.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Great. Thanks for sticking around. We're definitely in overtime at this point, so I'll try to get through these quickly so we have some time for questions at the end. I'm Michael Goldstein. I look after digital strategy for media, entertainment, and communications at Adobe. And what I'm going to share with you all today is some research that we did in partnership with the Diffusion Group around live sports viewers. And what I'm going to try to do as a part of that, this research in total was about 240 individual slides of data, which clearly we don't have time to go through each and every one on. So I'm going to try to pick out the nuggets of interesting information out of there and give it a little bit of context, thus the kind of things around personalized experiences. So just before we dive in, so the Diffusion Group, a group we partnered with to do this research, the panel ended up being 2,000 random respondents from a pool that started at several million. It was double-blind opt-in. We pulled people out when we saw them do things like straight line it. So that's what we're starting with. The other thing is, when we're talking about live sports viewing today, obviously, live streaming has become much more prevalent in sports viewing. So we qualified the folks that we surveyed for this research by asking them if they were broadband users. So broadband penetration in the US, roughly 83, 84% right now. The live sports viewers that we looked at came out of that pool. So diving into some of the data here, in total, live sports viewers represented about 90% of the adult broadband audience. So again, that 83, 84% of the US population, 90% of those folks are in the survey having identified as being people who watch at least live sports at least occasionally. A couple other interesting data points around who they are. 74% of them own at least one connected television. Great for the folks who do live linear broadcast. 94% of them still watch live television, so that's definitely not irrelevant yet. And then towards the bottom there, some of the viewing trends on connected devices that are not the television set, so PC, smartphone, tablet, percentages by which this entire group spends some amount of time streaming live sports on those kinds of devices. Other big kind of data point in here, social media, obviously huge in the sports world. Lots of people have invested a lot of time, both with athletes and clubs and leagues as a whole, in social media. 91% of live sports viewers actively engage in social networks, and as you might expect, the most popular among those are Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram in that order. Also, as you might expect, there is more activity in social networks amongst 18 to 34-year-olds, the youngest group in the survey, up at around 96% of those live sports viewers who are in the working in the social space, and lowest amongst the older groups. However, that's still pretty high, 82% of 55 to 65-year-olds. So lots of opportunity in social. I'm sure many of you, working in professional leagues and even college, definitely see a lot of traction from the efforts in social. Since we are talking about live sports viewing, though, I also wanted to take a look at how do folks who are engaged in social networks view live streaming through social networks. So this isn't quite as rosy. About 39% of the folks we surveyed who are active in social have not heard about live streaming sports through social media. Another 30% have heard of it, but they're not really familiar with how it works. Another 24% have heard about it, but don't use it. And if you're doing your math there, that leaves us with just 8% of live sports viewers who use social media regularly who actually stream live sports through a social network. So it's definitely still an emerging area. But lots of opportunity given the fact that 91% of live sports viewers are on social networks. So an area to focus on, something to track over time, not really their critical mass at this point, though. Part of what was done in the research as well was, asking the respondents about their level of fandom, or how fanatical are you about certain kinds of sports. And we asked this across about 15 different sports, and ended up bucketing them based on the responses on a scale of 1 to 10. So 5 and below, you're a minor fan, 6 moderate, 8 heavy, and 9 or 10, you're a super fan. As you might expect, because we're asking live sports viewers about their levels of fandom, there are more super fans in this group than there are any other group, but it does pan out pretty evenly. And the reason we kind of came up with this segmentation is when you start looking at the data, and this segmentation kind of runs through most of the research, we saw significant differences in these groups, particularly between the super and heavy fans and then the minor and moderate fans. So there's some significant differences there, things to be aware of, really as you're thinking about your fan base and how you want to engage with them and where you want to engage with them. That kind of split becomes an interesting data point that could potentially be used with how you actually want to engage with them and where you want to engage with them. So why I say your mileage may vary is, again, this is one segmentation strategy that was used for this piece of research given the data that we had coming back out of all of the questions. Sports is becoming pretty fractured at this point, right? You've got folks who follow players, you've got folks who follow teams, who follow entire leagues. You're trying to push ticket sales, merch sales, fantasy leagues. There's a lot going on there. So there are a lot of different ways that you could theoretically segment your fans to understand how you want to message them, how you want to reach out to them, how you want to engage them and move them through the kind of cycle of fandom over time. So let's talk about the demographics a little bit because this is still important. Interestingly or not, amongst age and gender, there's not a whole lot of variance amongst these different groups, which is good. We wouldn't really expect fandom to line up around age groups. There's really only a 2-year difference between the oldest group and the youngest group. Heavy fans tend to be the youngest. Minor fans tend to be the oldest. Gender split, on the whole, was, I think, 52-48, male-female. Super fans, heavy fans, definitely much more likely to be male than female. Minor fans, much more likely to be female than male. That's just the way this panned out. I heard someone mentioning earlier today when right after Barack Obama spoke and there were lines for the bathroom, this is one of the great things about being a woman at this conference. There's no lines for the restroom. So that seems to play out here. Some other stats here around household income. So this is modestly interesting and potentially informing in terms of how you engage and potentially where you would maybe want to message things that were higher costs, such as season tickets versus a jersey or a hat or something like that if you had the choice. Super fans tend to have higher household incomes than fans that are heavy fans, moderate fans, or minor fans, and it kind of goes straight down from super all the way down to minor. In terms of connected TV usage, so we had connected TV ownership. In terms of usage, super fans use it the most. 80% of them use connected TV to live stream sports. And it kind of runs down there. Moving over a little bit more to the right, you've got average weekly usage for streaming online video. So as a whole, this group spends about 7.5 hours a week streaming online video of any kind. What's interesting in here is you can see minor fans spend a lot more time than super fans with streaming video content. Not surprisingly, though, the super fans and the heavy fans spend a lot more time streaming online video content, live video content, than the minor fans do. So looks like minor fans are spending more time streaming, but they're not streaming sports, and super fans are spending less time streaming, but more streaming sports. But if you took it in the broader context of what that means for overall TV viewership, as a whole, live sports viewers spend an average of 29 hours a week watching television, whether it's live linear television or streaming television on any kind of device that can do that. Live broadcast viewing as a whole actually increases with fandom. So we saw the live streaming go up with lower fandom, but with higher fandom, the overall television viewing actually goes up. So minor fans spend about 5 hours a week less than super fans do watching television in whole, and potentially the 5 hours is actually going over to streaming video and some other things. So interesting bit there. Younger fans are also more likely to own a connected television than older fans, but they're also more likely to watch live streaming sports on a non-TV device. So across PC, smartphone, tablet, younger fans tend to use those devices more frequently to live stream than older fans do. So again, when you're trying to think about how do I want to reach certain fan bases, how do I want to reach certain age groups, you might find that some of them are more receptive or more engaged on some of these other kinds of platforms. Incidentally, when we were asking the questions around what kinds of devices you're using to live stream sports, there were a couple of different answers that we got, but two that stuck out as the most common. So why are you not watching this on the TV in the living room? One is it's occupied and I can't use it. The other is I want to watch it by myself. So if you want to contextualize that, maybe it's, hey, I've already got my show on, don't bother me, or I don't want to listen to you scream at the TV, take your computer and go in the other room so I don't have to listen to it. But that's the two reasons mainly why they're not just watching on the TV on the wall. So when we looked at what types of sports live stream viewers were looking at across all devices, one thing definitely sticks out, and I've highlighted here, so it most definitely should stick out, is that NFL is the most prevalent live stream sport across every single device. Regardless of your level of fandom, the only places that it really disappears is in the moderate fans and in the minor fans when you get down to tablet and smartphone. Interestingly about tablet, though, as a whole, folks who live stream sports on tablets have the highest household income of the entire group at around $80,000 a year, which is much higher than the average for the group as a whole. They're also the most educated, with 50% of them having bachelor's degrees. So potentially a more lucrative audience in tablet. And again, food for thought in terms of what kind of sports, what kinds of engagement are happening on those devices. Kind of moving through some of the other leagues in there, NBA. Maybe it's a more digitally native group for some reason, but we see a lot less of the engagement happening on a connected TV or an over-the-top device, and more of it happening on PC, tablet, and smartphone. And then moving through again, we start to see more engagement around the Olympics at lower fan levels. But the thing is here, and this is interesting, so the Summer Olympics was the #2 most enthusiastic sport when we asked folks, like, which sports are you most enthusiastic about? It's not that superfans are not fans of the Olympics, they are just greater fans of other sports as well. And the interesting kind of takeaway from there is that superfans are not just fans of football and college ball and baseball, as you kind of see up there at the top. It's really about more than football for them. So if you're thinking about how do I keep my football fan, my basketball fan, my college ball fan, my MLB fan engaged, especially as those seasons cross over, you're very much competing for mind share. About over 50% of the superfans rated themselves superfans for 5 different sports. Those sports were football, basketball, baseball, college football, and college basketball. They said, Summer Olympics. They said those were their favorite sports overall. The rest of the groups in the heavy fans, they only had 2 sports that they rated themselves as superfans for on average. So. Superfans are about more than just football there. But what if you're trying to reach these folks outside of the 22% of time they spend on television with sports? Local news pops out as an area that most of these folks are spending time in, roughly 50 to 60% across all groups. So if you're looking to engage folks with sports while they're not in a sports mindset, those might be interesting places to go. The only real changes that happen along here, as you can kind of see, is there's more of an interest in dramas and comedies as you kind of move down in fandom, and maybe it's just that superfans are very, very serious people and very focused on the sport, and that's why they're not watching comedy. We also looked at the impact of advertising. So advertising is obviously a huge part of the sports business. It pretty much pays for most of what we do here. And not surprisingly, a lot of people find the ads entertaining. A lot more people actually find them irritating. And what kind of shows up in here is if you're looking across all live sports viewers, superfans and minor fans, you'll notice that with regular stream television, or with regular television, actually, all television, there is much more of a tolerance in terms of the ads being entertaining rather than irritating in non-sports environments. In the bottom row there, when you're looking at sports, you can see that it's mildly less entertaining as a whole for folks when they see ads during sports. And it definitely gets more irritating for the superfans when they go into the sports world, so they'd really just like to see their game, please, and not have any more ads. Oddly, minor fans kind of goes the other way. So when you get into the sports environment, 30% of them say they're irritated by the ads, but only 27% say they're irritated during a live sporting event. Perhaps that's because for the minor fans, it's actually it's about more than just the game, it's about the entire experience. So again, this is the kind of thing that should become a data point in terms of, well, how do I want to message these people? If I have a choice of one ad versus another, I have a choice of running a promo because I'm doing dynamic ads or something like that. Different kinds of fans might respond differently to different types of advertisements. There we go. Hey, that worked. We also looked at the quantity of ads and how that affects viewing behavior. So when we asked, do you watch more or less live sports when there are more ads or less ads, 29% of folks said they will spend more time watching the game when there are fewer ads, and conversely, 19% said they would spend less time watching the game when there are more ads. So the fewer the ads, the more time we spend watching TV. The more ads there are, the less time we spend watching TV. Not that you can do a whole lot about this, but again, where you have those kinds of choices you can make in terms of the cadence or the pacing of ads that you want to have in a live stream, possibly in digital, something to think about in terms how you might want to alternate a paid commercial ad versus a promo or something that's more closely tied to the sport itself. The most adversely affected group by the advertising are the heavy fans, not the super fans, the heavy fans. 55% of them saying that they definitely watch less live sports when there are more ads. Potentially, these are folks who are not as much fans as super fans, and they really are trying to get into the sport, and kind of the things outside of that game itself are just distractions for them. Ad targeting, something that's becoming increasingly popular. So with kind of the rise of addressable advertising on television and dynamic ads in digital streams, there's definitely an opportunity out there to go and message ads to specific audiences at specific points in time and not kind of have to show them the same ad load that everybody sees in a broadcast. About 23% of the overall population said that the more relevant the ads are, the more likely I am to watch the live game. And that kind of grows as you go through the different levels of fandom. And again, interesting, heavy fans, remember, were the most impacted by the number of ads, but they're also the most positive about relevant ads, engaging them more and keeping them watching more live television. Oddly here, if you look at the bottom here, the very bottom row that's a little bit hard to read there, some folks said the more relevant the ad is, the less time I will spend watching the game. So potentially there are people who are freaked out by the fact that they're getting something that speaks directly to them. Not a significant number of people on the whole, but definitely it's out there. The biggest swath here in the middle, though, in green, is that most people really don't care one way or the other. So the opportunity is there. It's just not there, in massive quantities. It's there for about a quarter of that population. And there are other cuts of this data inside the research that get to more specificity around, which groups actually are more receptive to it. And in fact, that ad relevance is actually much more relevant to younger audiences. So 31% of the youngest group in the set, 28% of the next oldest group in the set said they would actually watch more live sports if the ads were more relevant to them. So as younger groups come into the sports world as adults, they're kind of expecting that they're going to get these things that are relevant to them, not just kind of blanket ads that may or may not have anything to do with what they're interested in. Okay, moving on, one of the other things we kind of looked at here was how are people responding to some of the more technological advancements in the space? Things like getting a 360 view from inside the stadium during a game, or being able to choose your own camera angle, or having an immersive VR experience. We asked how valuable they thought it would be, and asked, again, across those different fan bases. By and large, multiple camera angles was the most popular. People saying, on the whole, 60% of them saying they find that valuable. Super fans, heavy fans tend to skew more towards finding value in those things than minor fans do. But the interesting thing here, too, is that is the number of folks who said they would pay for this. So 72% of the overall panel here said they would pay for a 360 view, or they would pay for multiple camera angles. And the questions were phrased, would you pay? Would you pay monthly? Would you pay per game? Would you pay per season? How much would you pay? There's a lot of specificity in there that I can't get fully into this slide. But they're willing to pay for those things. VR, interestingly, while not as valuable on the whole to this group, they were more willing to pay for it. Potentially that's because there's more of an investment in the actual physical product of a VR headset, and there's more opportunity to use it outside of just a sporting event. And then the last piece here, most of them would prefer that this interactivity occur on the main TV in the living room, not on the tablet, not on the smartphone, not on the PC. You could make some inferences because that is a larger form factor. It's a lot easier to kind of work with multiple camera angles, or really get the sense of what it feels like in a 360 view. I find it interesting that people who, when they talked about VR experiences, that they would prefer that on the TV, since that's kind of its own device, but presumably that's having some connectivity back to the set itself. So what does this data tell us? So as with any kind of data, and we've been hearing this all day, and you'll hear all about it tomorrow, data is directional, but data is supposed to also be helping us craft the experience for fans. It's really about the experience. How do I create something for a fan that makes them enjoy the game, keeps them interested, keeps them coming back, keeps them spending money with us? So when we think about this, data is really the fuel for differentiating those fan experiences. Without the data, we don't know how we should be speaking to different groups of fans. And this, the use of the data kind of really falls squarely in the middle of this process here, right? We're all creating content, whether it be, highlight reels or social content or photo galleries or apps or whatever we're creating. There's lots of content out there, and we need to measure all of that content. We need to understand what the valuable behaviors are, how fans are responding to it, the kinds of social gestures they make when we put it out there, what kind of platforms are they consuming it on, what kinds of features are they most interested in. We measure all those things, and that's where you start to come up with these segments, and you're able to address the fans in the ways that the data is telling you they kind of naturally group together. And like I said, super fan, moderate fan, heavy fan, minor fan, this is one way of segmenting data. It's the way that we segmented a lot of the data for this research, but there's lots of different ways to do that. There's certainly age and gender. If you're going after traditional advertising folks, that's the way they want to do it. But you can also look at generational things. You can look at their engagement with your digital properties overall. You could look at their affinity for certain types of content or certain specific teams. You can also look very much at their propensity to potentially buy season tickets or buy a jersey or buy a hat. And then what you want to do is activate intelligently from that data and from those segments so that you're targeting them or personalizing to them or optimizing or creating curated experiences that are going to keep those folks engaged so that in the end you're ending up monetizing them. And again, because there's so much different content and there's so many ways to measure and really so many ways to segment, you really want to be thoughtful about the different types of data you bring into the equation. Again, some of the live stream viewing can be a part of that, engagement with just articles or fantasy sports or pricing out tickets but not buying them. All of those things can become data points that help you identify what kind of folks do we have here? How might I want to think about these audiences? I might want to think about them in terms of fandom. If I've got enough data to understand fans across multiple sports, if I'm a broadcast network or someone like that. But you may also want to take a look at it again generationally. I might want to look at millennials who happen to be super fans. And in that way when I get to the execution piece, I can say, well, hey, these are maybe folks who I want to push that VR experience in front of because I know that they're more apt to be receptive to it. And I have a sponsor opportunity with a major tech company, and that works for me and that works for the fan as well. So in the end, again, what we're really talking about is using this data to craft experiences. And experiences really matter more than anything. These are the things that differentiate, just in general, one brand from another. Why do I want to buy season tickets to my favorite football team versus a baseball team versus a basketball team? I want to do that because that experience is better for me all around. And every time you create those experiences, every fan, every spectator, every player, they can have an amazing, unforgettable experience if you're using the data to craft those experiences. So I finished ahead of time, which is shocking. But if there are any questions, I will do my best to answer them. And if not, we've ended overtime early. Just one back.
No, go.
Did you guys look at ticket buying behavior as part of this? So when you were looking at, you were looking at live viewership, and that was sort of your first lens on it. Mm-hmm. But did you, I think a lot of teams struggle with, well, they're watching a lot, but does that mean they're not actually coming to the games where we know we can ultimately monetize them? What did you see from that, or was that even something you guys measured as part of this?
Yeah, I don't think that was part of the research. It's, like I said, it's 240 odd pages. The diffusion group did this, and I'm able to share some of it. I did not see ticket sales data in any of the questions that were part of that, though.
Ask about the data that was presented, if it was focused about a certain league or looking at all the different leagues across the spectrum.
Yeah, so there were 15 sports that were put out there. So it was NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, college basketball, college football, hockey, I said hockey, Summer Olympics, Winter Olympics, soccer. Trying to remember what the other ones were in there. I believe that is it. That's not all of them. If you give me, actually, if you give me a card, I can tell you exactly what all the sports were. And if you bear with me, I could actually probably pull it up and figure out what it was. But it was 15 individual, either professional or college leagues. There's a question all the way in the back. Oh, this one.
Hi, thanks. Was there any particular insights observable across the varying fandoms and the types of experiences they were willing to purchase?
In terms of like the things around VR and 360 and that kind of thing?
Yeah,
or?
I'm referring to that. But is there, is there a trend that you're seeing in terms of like, let's call them like the bandwagon fans? What are they most interested in purchasing? Is there any insight around that?
The data that I showed, it largely followed those same lines. So across each of the fan segments, the interest was in the 360 view, in the multi-camera angle 360, and then VR. Those were the three sort of visual ones. There were other questions around sort of auditory things. How important is the sound to you? There were questions around what kind of television do you own? Is it an HDTV? Is it a 4K TV? As fandom goes up, there is more likelihood that there is a 4K HDTV in those homes. So the super fans are spending more money on the things that create that experience for them, by and large. It doesn't really, there isn't really a bubble or a dip where you see minor fans, spending more on high quality televisions. It is actually the super fans.
Did you spend any time looking for, did you see any differences in terms of fantasy sports and the behaviors of people who play fantasy sports and what their desires were, how that was different, sort of a whole tree of things based on like fantasy sports and how this related to your research? Yeah,
there were a couple of questions on fantasy sports. I think there were two. Heavy fans, super fans, more affinity for those things, but there wasn't a lot of depth underneath all of that. They really focused a lot on the live viewing. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.